Hello everybody. Welcome to Speaking of Seeing. Our topic this evening is winter. I guess it's our Christmas special, Bill. What do you say to that?
Well, there's snow on the ground here. Is there any snow on the ground there?
No, but I do have tinsel in my hair, and you
It's
have a
true.
Santa hat on.
You made me get a Santa hat, so I am wearing a Santa hat.
Mhm. um, Winter as a topic for us as artists, though, is a really broad topic. We chose it because we started speaking about winter just in conversation the other day, and it did seem immediately that there was something obvious about us talking about winter.
Well,
Uh,
I think that if you're going to do it, you need to do it now around Christmas time before winter gets depressing a month later.
it's
While
winter
winter's still
depressing.
exciting. While winter is still exciting, you got to do it. You don't find the lack of light and the cold depressing?
Um, I think it's equally as beautiful and stimulating as the high summer, just for
Oh,
different
interesting.
reasons.
Yeah, I like seasons. I like it being, 30 degrees here now versus 80 or 90 degrees in the summertime. I like having that change over the year, but I do find the winter hard. I think it's the lack of light. But
Mm.
how did we actually get into showing passing paintings between each other though about this?
I think we were talking about how,
Oh, it was that picture that I sent you from the park.
yeah, so a lovely picture from Prospect Park that you sent me, out for a walk, and comparing notes, I suppose, about snowiness and wintriness. Uh, Actually, I mean, the first painting that we shared amongst ourselves, I think, was this one.
Yeah,
But never come.
yeah. Which I love all of these old town people paintings that happened for a few hundred years there.
Mm.
Um, there's just it's like the closest we can get to looking through a time machine at like what was going on back then. I can only imagine that the people who paint these were trying to think of every single possible thing that people could be doing on the ice at any particular time and packing it all in the painting, and that historians now today look back 400 years for this and have some sense of what people did during the winter time when the little ice age was happening. uh,
Yeah.
I love that whole idea that it's like a little window of time to the past, and how similar, weirdly, what people do now when the water ice is over and people go to the park.
Well, that happens a lot less here than ever before.
Things
Um,
don't ice over because of the climate change.
Things don't ice over. We don't get snowfall. We do occasionally. The happy days of snow days from school where none of us can go anywhere, and a
Yeah.
real sense of kind of hunkering down. It's interesting that we're looking at these paintings in this particular winter, I think,
Yeah.
because that sense of hunkering down now has a much more loaded and negative sense to it.
It does, and even the idea of snow days. I don't know how it is over there, but I think that the plan is that there will be no more snow days going forward because they'll just do virtual classes on Zoom like they would now. They're just going to start doing that as instead of snow days. So there's no sort of, I don't know. When I grew up in Connecticut, if you woke up in the morning and there was snow on the ground, it'd be like, is it enough snow that they canceled school? So we can go sledding or whatever. And you'd be up like listening to the television to find out which region 15 schools are closed, and you'd be like, yeah, as a kid. That was like the way things happened. I don't know how it works over there, but that's
Similar.
totally how it was here.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the frozen north, and it seems that memory has a really strange function with winter. I mean, for me, thinking about winter, my childhood winters were endlessly snowy. I'm not sure they really were, but in the tunnel of time through which I go to remember being a little girl, I always remember ice and icicles and snowflakes and snowmen and being wrapped up really cozily. A really kind of, funnily enough, a warmth to winter, a sort of sentimental warmth, a
Sure.
nostalgia that is kind of unrivaled even in the heady days of summer, I suppose.
Do you feel like because you grew up somewhere where there was more ice and snow and things that you're specially equipped to walk on ice and snow when you have to? Like, do you think you have better skills at that than other people do?
I don't know. I mean, I did a lot of ice skating as a girl.
Yeah, yeah. I was
Um,
just like even walking across snow when you meet somebody who comes up from the American South, say, and they move to New York and the sidewalk ice is over. me having grown up in New England and going to school in Boston and stuff, I'm so used to dealing with walking on ice. And then some people aren't. It's like a skill that they don't have, you know?
What you mean, kind of like Kristoff and Sven in Frozen, in the way they traverse.
Yes. I've only seen it once, but yes, I'd imagine that would be the case.
But back to the painting,
Yeah,
Bill. Come
sorry,
on
go
now.
ahead.
So the fact is, this painting really is representative of a period in history that is pretty bleak, actually. You know, the ice age, the mini ice age,
Yeah.
lasted for a really long time, centuries, actually.
Yeah. I mean, this one's Dutch, right? But there, I mean, there are a number of similar paintings on the Thames, even in London, right? Where people, they would have markets and things out on the ice.
Yeah, and again, I think in terms of talking about memory and kind of a sentimental sense of Christmas time and the wintriness for people from the West and particularly from the Northern Hemisphere, there's a kind of Dickensian element to thinking about Christmas,
Sure.
which is about, yes, London and that kind of very Victorian gathering around the hearth, there being gifts and top hats and people walking in tailcoats with canes in the snow. Um, and yes, skating,
How much
children
of
skating.
how much of that is in your mind pure fantasy, right? You know,
Yes.
even if you popped back there, would it feel anything like that? Or is that all just some story we've told ourselves about how it was back then because Dickens wrote that way?
Well, I wonder about it because when we look at paintings like this, obviously you're right to mention that historians use paintings like this to try and get a feel more anecdotally for life in the 17th century. You know, simultaneously in Holland at the same time, there are many other things emerging in painting that were to guide, again, really centuries worth of uh, art, history, language, and narrative qualities, things that are really to do with coming away from purely religious scenes.
Yeah,
When you sent me this painting, rather to begin with, it reminded me very much of something that wasn't altogether happy. Um, it reminded me maybe of a kind of Hieronymus Bosch type
sure. Yeah.
swash of people that was actually quite unpleasant.
Except for the demons, you know, doing terrible things to people in the background and that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, it's not, you know, there's not the machinery of evil, but
Yeah.
actually maybe there is. And
Yeah.
again, I think it's right to mention that in, you know, Dutch painting and this kind of mini ice age that occurred, that period brought with it huge challenges for humans. There was a lot of disease, there was a lot of pestilence,
Yep.
crops failed.
Well, but at the same time, I think paintings like this, I was going to say photos like this, paintings like this have this sense of, despite all of those things having happened, these people are just living their lives and trying to enjoy, hey, it's a cold day, but the thing is iced over. Let's put on skates or go for a walk or go snow ice fishing or whatever. That there was the need to find joy regardless of what was going on around you. I mean, there was a thing recently where I was listening to, and somebody was saying that, you know, there's whole generations of people who live through, say, some autocratic government or something. They don't know any different.
Mm.
In many ways, these people didn't know any different, you know. And as much as you were saying about moving away from religious paintings, I feel like this is a good example of probably more actual reality versus all of the money that was, say, going into the Netherlands and sort of the mythologies over those families and the way that they painted, you know, all of the, oh, this guy leads this big giant company, Dutch company that makes all this money and whatnot, and sort of the mythology that these people built up around themselves like royalty. I feel like this is like a lower class version of closer to what it probably was like for the average person versus
Yes, I
what
mean,
you
this
would
is
see.
actually,
Yeah,
you know, we could say that there's a parity with kind of Shakespearean mob.
sure.
And of course, looking at the period in which it's been painted. But also, I do wonder about the building, the purpose of that. There's almost like there is a function to the building being where it is. And actually looking at Evercamp's other paintings,
Yep.
he often paints the same town. Um, it's obviously where he lived, and that building features time and time again in virtually all of his work. Really, that is these kinds of
Maybe it's just right out his window.
yeah. I wonder about it,
I,
um, but I
you know,
also wonder what the building represents, if it represents something or if it did simply happen to be there. It's austere, it's very pink.
but maybe that's just a very example of a very simple example of just the building style that was going on at that time. Although it's funny because it's got the way that sort of wall comes out into this other building right on the water. There's almost like a medieval quality to the way that those buildings are connected. It's almost like maybe the one over by the water is even older than the thing back off the water and that kind of stuff, where there's generational stuff being built and connecting to each other.
Yes, but also in your mention of these kind of grand families, and obviously the Dutch Golden Age, where trade and economy grew at a very kind of rapid rate.
Where they raped and pillaged all the other people before the British got around to it, right?
Right. But the fact is that the building perhaps is emblematic of that there is a grand sense, whilst all these other things play out. Humans will always be human. We will always endeavor to have small dramas and cataclysms in our own meager little lives, and yet still these large edifices that are representing government or religion or something higher.
Yeah, the thing is larger than the people in here.
Yes, and it looms. It's not that it's just a building and it's part of a landscape. It's actually the landscape, really, as much as we can see way into the distance.
Sure.
And that flat land of Holland. The fact is that the way that the artist has chosen to compose the image, put the building as it is, it does, that word looming. It's looming above all these people, and they seem to be, are they aware? Are they aware of what looms over them?
Oh, see, it's funny that's how you see it. I tend to lean towards it is very cold and they're in this inhospitable environment, and that building is shelter and refuge if they wanted to get out of the cold.
But notice that, none of them approach the building, or do they? I mean, you've got on your iPad, you can
the one
zoom
guy
in.
sitting down over on the right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one wee man over there with his, like, a red hat on, I think.
It's funny. I'm drawn to, okay, see the hole in the wall between the two sort of little buildings?
Yeah.
Right. If you go down from there, there's an old person sitting in a chair.
Mm-hmm.
You see that person?
Yeah.
I am stuck on that person. Like, just thinking about some old guy who's too old to go on the ice because he'll fall and break his hip and die. And so his family just sort of sat him down on a chair next to the water to watch all of these other people frolic and play and do these things. And I juxtaposed him to, say, one of the kids, either these kids down in the lower right from there with the family coming in, the little baby and the other kid, or some of the kids out on the ice. And I just think, we think about these people as, okay, this is 1615, but that old guy was probably born in 1550. And the things that he saw were even just as different from our grandparents having seen, World War II, say, and the way we see the world. That much change probably happened in their world at the same time. So it's funny, I see it very much from the perspective of all these people and think about what their lives were really like at a period of time where, as you say, living was not easy, It's funny because when I look at a painting like this, I see it far more as a statement of what was rather than the symbolism of what an artist is trying to put into it and what they're trying to say. Even though you're probably right that they are trying to say something, I almost trust my initial thing of, oh, this is just people on a lake, or on the river.
But there's not a value in either way, or no. Rather, I don't mean it's valueless.
There's no right or wrong.
But it's not right or wrong. Again, we touched on this when we talked about the Wyeth. We rush in to give value to paintings if they're good or bad, or we are right or wrong in our assessment of them. But actually, it doesn't matter.
No,
And
well, it certainly doesn't matter to the artist, and it doesn't matter to the next person who's going to see it without us telling them about it.
no, but also I don't think it matters. You know, you and I aren't writing kind of scholarly papers about this for
Speak
purposes
for
of,
yourself, Sandy. I'm about to
oh,
go write a scholarly paper about this.
terribly sorry, I do take that back. But you know, we're not approaching this necessarily from a hugely academic start point. We're just two friends talking about things that interest us.
Yeah.
And as such, it's, you know, whatever you say about this painting belongs to you. And again, I do just want to bring this back to kind of teacher point here, is that when I look at paintings or any visual art with any students, I always remind them that their opinion about what they see is never wrong, because it is their opinion.
Yep.
And the skill comes only from really them being able to qualify that opinion. And they don't have to agree with what I say or think.
What if you have an opinion and they have an opinion, and then you find out that there is an objective fact about what the artist was trying to say about it?
Well, I think, of course, that's the thing that furnishes our interpretation. But if we don't have that, equally, it's okay. Before we give ourselves shed loads of information, it's okay for us to approach this with our own innate wisdom and common sense.
Yeah, totally.
And the person in the chair, I see people in the chair down here at the beach, at the
Sure.
ocean's edge, whilst other people play in the water. And, you know, this figure could be striking a pose of sadness or of longing, or it could be that they survey from a sense of greatness or superiority.
Sure.
They
Yeah.
don't seem to be particularly troubled by all the kind of shenanigans of all these other people.
This may be the most exciting thing they do all day, is to be able to watch other people having a good time. You know? No, you're totally right. Yeah, I assume. See, I always go back to. I always assume that my later years are going to be sad and depressing, and you know, I'm that the end of my life is going to be a terrible thing that I have nightmares about. So when I see people in paintings or art that are older, I put my own fears upon those people in paintings. You know, I my biggest regret, not having done something and then regretting it later. That's by far my biggest fear, which is why when I watch, like, you know, Pixar's Up, kills me, because that movie's all about regret, at least like the first third of it. And it's like I've watched it once and I had to stop every like 10 minutes because I was crying so hard. So yeah, I mean, it is how you see things. I mean, even the look at how he painted the sky, even the sort of the gray swirls and colors that go on in the sky. I mean,
Well, that's the part that makes it very subtle. You know,
yeah,
these people going about their business, they're not very subtle in that activity.
no,
Whereas the painter looking on, I often question whether painters are passive or active in the looking. And then I question if I'm passive or active in the receiving of what I see.
don't wait. Hold on a second. Doesn't a painter or an artist, by definition, have to be active in what they're portraying?
I don't know. I mean, we're
How
really
could,
veering
how could
off
you,
our
how could you
Christmas special here, but if we were
well, how
to,
could you passively paint?
well, I wonder what there is in terms of passive observation, where even listening to you describing, for example, your fear and how that then gets projected into this tiny little character sitting in a chair.
Yep.
That's a very active engagement
Totally.
with what's being seen, and me too. I'm actively engaging because I'm putting myself sometimes, not always, but sometimes into the painting. But equally, I could simply see and not project into the painting. And likewise, if I were sitting surveying a scene and I was making a painting myself, I could believe myself to be part of what I'm painting because I'm painting it, or I could believe myself to be part of the painting because what I see within it represents me.
Sure. I also, yeah, no, you're right. I also wonder when you are walking through a museum and some piece of art catches your eye, whether it's color or composition or, what have you, subject matter or whatever. I wonder if how much of that is cleaved along those lines of this painting makes me actively want to engage with it and this one doesn't, because there are plenty of people who would walk by this painting wherever it is at the, you know, Rijksmuseum or wherever the heck it is, might just walk by it and it does nothing for them, and they're going to be completely passive about it to the point where they're not even going to engage with it at all besides a glance.
But I
So
think there you're putting being passive into a very diminishing or diminished position. I'm not talking about passivity as a diminishment of anything. I'm talking about it as a particular way of engaging. So passive engagement might be where one sees without investing one's own identification with
like passive sonar, where you're not sending out the bleeps, you're just listening, as opposed to sending out a thing to bounce off it.
kind of.
Yeah.
But thinking about this old man in his chair, and you saying, well, maybe he was born in the 16th century, he would have seen a whole bunch of stuff that was perhaps very different. If we reverse in time a little,
that's him down there playing hockey.
there he is as a boy in Bruegel's painting. But I like looking at Bruegel's painting. Again, there's many links to artists such as Bosch. This idea that the human condition is kind of eternal, timeless, and filled with both joy and incredible suffering. I'm going to say that I see all those things actually in this painting.
Doesn't this painting, though, because of the way the mountains are in the background and the way the foreground and the background are engaged, this one feels far more composited and fantastical than the last, to me. This feels more like a caricature than the other one did.
Is that to do with a kind of
style of the art?
A technical, stylistic?
It might. It may be that, it was that later sort of that era of Dutch painting in the 17th century where things kind of like locked into realism in a way where they didn't quite get there.
Don't forget, if we're looking at kind of equivalents in religious painting,
sure,
we're looking at painting this period that was still in many ways very flat.
Yeah, the fact that, I mean, yes, in this era, it's not that there is depth. The depth is great. I'm just saying, like, those mountains feel like there's no way there were mountains that jaggy up in the background of this scene for real, It feels like a little bit of a story that he's actually trying to tell here. I may be wrong. You can disagree with me, but I just, what's interesting?
Thank you, Bill.
Well, no, I'm just saying that it's fine if you disagree with me. The bush in the foreground here, that's sort of like this dead bush with just some vines kicking out of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting where, that's another one of those examples of something that if you take that out and just had white snow there, it kind of needs to be there, even though it's kind of weird to have it there.
I think this is a kind of reach for naturalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, to me, there is an obvious connection to then what happens later in painting. We still have those people behaving, doing things. The slope of the shoulders and the hunters, I think, speak to how people in this era were fatigued by the cold.
And the scrawny dogs who didn't get a lot to eat.
But just the sense, I do always, again, come back to this sense of equivalencies when maybe, 500 years from now, two silly people with strange headgear on are talking about art from now,
Yeah.
whether there'll be something in the gait and demeanor of the characters or figures portrayed in art now, from now, that speaks of our fatigue, of our current situation, COVID, or
Sure.
there are these clues about humanity's condition, their emotional states. That's an obvious thing to say also, but I think this is very clever. It could be subtle, in as much as the style of painting isn't particularly subtle. The codes within it, they're kind of, it's not even symbols, it's simply painting a scene in which we have this loaded language of life.
Well, I mean, two things that I noticed right away is the sign that's half broken over on the left. It's half hanging, like it broke and they haven't gotten around to fixing it because it's the winter time and it's hard to fix, or the idea that, I mean, as you can see with the snow, these guys are heading out into what is largely virgin snow to go. So they have a long day ahead of them of going to find something so that everyone can eat that night.
I mean, they're being watched over by crows.
Yeah, never a good sign.
I find all of these details fascinating, disconcerting. The more you look, again, I mean, maybe if I went to a gallery you mentioned before, there might be people walk past these paintings, they don't engage with them. I have to say, Bruegel's painting in a gallery, I wouldn't necessarily choose to go and see them.
Sure.
But actually, when I meet these paintings, when I really do spend some time with them, they're so extraordinarily powerful.
Do you find that even if you're looking at a quite high res photograph of this painting, that your interpretation of it in person is drastically different, even if you know the painting from afar?
What I haven't done this time, and I did when we met last week to talk about the Wyeth painting, is I haven't put the sizes of the paintings, and I think that has
How big is this one? Do you know?
This is quite a big painting. This would be, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine based on Bruegel's other work. I could be wrong. I better be careful what I say in case I'm wrong. A disclaimer, I have not researched the actual size of this painting.
Okay, so what's your guess?
But I think if I would approach this in a gallery and I would feel that I would enter the landscape, so that there would be a sense of me entering the space, and I don't always get that looking at an image on the screen.
Yeah. I mean,
when we look at other work, maybe it's less difficult to digest things like woodblock prints. I wonder if that's because they already have a different currency because of the way in which they've been produced.
Yeah, it's when you look at the way that, I mean, and this was what, 1857. All right, so it's not like this is actually even that particularly old. The thing about a lot of works like that is that I don't know that I would have any idea within 2 or 3 centuries when that was made. You know what I'm saying? Just because I just don't have that kind of, it's not my vocabulary because it's not my culture, But how different people around the world will see the same thing with their eyes, but interpret it so differently in 2D in art,
I mean, I don't get the same when I look at Hiroshige's work about snow, especially.
Yeah,
I always get a sense of clarity, I get a sense of clarity that I don't get when I look at the Dutch paintings of snow or ice. And that's because even though there may be human presence in these woodblocks, the humans are, again, this is back to this idea of being passive in some way. They might be doing things, but they're doing things with a different serenity.
Yeah. I don't feel like they're any more important than each individual tree is in this work.
But that again is a huge cultural barometer
Yeah.
for us. You know, the Dutch paintings are very much warts and all.
Yep.
Um,
I think that there's a lack of, I mean, it's not that it's not that it's not complex, but there's a simplicity or a lack of, there's not a lot of extra stuff in there. It's kind of clutter free in a lot of ways.
and yet it's extraordinarily detailed.
No, yeah, that's why I'm saying it's not that it's not complex or detailed. But it's also, there's a lot of things that have been removed so that you're not distracted by them, you know. And I mean, so little color as well. I mean, it's really just the water, right? That is.
I find this a very striking color image.
Even without the blue of the water? I mean, that blue is pretty great, but I mean, it's interesting because it's not actually that saturated. It's just, it feels really saturated against the lack of saturation in the rest of it.
I mean, could we say that there's, if we go back to the first painting, that sky, the quality of depth in the sky is about this multi-layered, kind of exquisite exploration of color and tone.
Sure, absolutely. But I mean, this whole picture is also very warm. It almost feels like it's got a big, 81A warming filter across the lens.
This one,
that one as well too.
That, yeah. And then this one, we're talking about.
That feels very cold to me.
It's very cold.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it doesn't have a particular presence of yellow. But
yellow
is still there, it's really, really, again, very clever, thinking about kind of technical art making, thinking about the balance of color. That's why actually I picked the Helen Frankenthaler to put next to it. Because the color palette is remarkably similar.
Actually, and actually, they used the sort of streaks of blue down in the lower right-hand corner very much mirror the water in the other one.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very superficial connection between the two. It really was about color and about the way that the form travels through the space compositionally.
Do you like Frankenthaler?
I love Helen Frankenthaler. I think to say Winter Hunt also, of course, she would have been aware of the kind of codes and conventions of earlier painting. I would imagine she was familiar with this.
Sure.
And again, I don't know that for sure, but I'm going to make an assumption. But it's okay to assume, isn't it?
Yes, it is. For our purposes, it's absolutely okay to assume because we are doing no research on these.
No, I think it is useful to say to people that actually you and I haven't studied these in great detail.
Yeah, because you told us not to. I just like to
because I think it's actually really great to meet these paintings and to not know. I have a ballpark sense of a lot of this stuff because one, I like Helen Frankenthaler. I know a lot about Hiroshige in context of like a wider movement in not Japanese art specifically, but Japanese culture. And for me, as an art historian, Dutch painting is so hugely influential across really the whole rest of Western art. But nonetheless, you or I, neither have studied these in great detail.
No.
And that allows us these suppositions and conjectures. And I think that's the lifeblood of really trying to get to know these paintings. I want to get to know these paintings. I can go away and I can read heaps of stuff on Wikipedia, and I can dig deep and I can find lots of references to the historical context in which these images have emerged. And that is useful, but it comes back to something I keep I keep on saying it. I say it all the time to my students. We are thinking here about something that's highly nuanced, that doesn't have to be driven only by information.
Yeah, it can. The opposite of information being emotion in this case.
Wisdom.
Wisdom. But doesn't wisdom require facts, experience?
Yes, but I think that's a tiny part. But then to me, facts are often quite fluid things.
Yeah, wisdom is facts plus analysis.
Mm, wisdom, let's do an equation. Wisdom might be fact plus experience plus feeling plus this other thing that maybe cannot be named.
Introspection.
Cannot be named. Bill.
I don't like things that cannot be named.
I like
Like
things that
it's
cannot
like
be named.
The Voldemort of art.
Well, I like that idea. I like that, funnily enough, for somebody who spends such a long time talking to students about analysis and digging deep, going really, really deep into the images we study, I actually also like giving up into an image. I enjoy it, giving up into the image.
That's is that your term, or is that something you've learned somewhere else? I just
No,
find it interesting.
that's just what I think.
Yeah.
There's an element of surrender.
Yeah, render. Yeah,
Surrender,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's interesting because yeah, and maybe this just says a lot about you and I as people. Is that, yeah, the idea of me surrendering to anything is very uncomfortable. I mean, I will take in and I will analyze and I will think and I will feel, but I need to be part of that equation. It's interesting. Do we have wait, there's one more, right? Because there's the one we started with, the other one we started with.
Well, there's actually two more paintings.
Okay.
Um, there's this one.
Oh,
When
right.
you and I had our conversation about the Dutch Ice Age painting originally, I found an image, not this one, but that reminded me very much of Doig's painting. And the image that I chose was this one.
Yeah.
It's an imitation, so it's meant to be in the style of another artist. So the artist it's in the style of is Johan Barthold Jonckend, a Dutch painter again. The title of the painting is Skating in Holland, and it doesn't even have a fixed or a particularly fixed date, although we can see it's made right at the end of the 19th century.
Man, what is going on with the skies in Holland? I mean, just like look at that light there. And do you ever go to some place? Do you ever travel someplace that has a certain light in its art, and then you go there and you see the light that way when you're there, and you say to yourself, "Oh, that's what they were trying to recreate." Whether it's the high desert in America, or the northern latitudes of Europe, or Italy, in the evening and that kind of thing. There's like a certain look to the light, and you don't really get it until you go there and then you see it for real, and then you kind of understand the representations
I think
better.
geographically in the Netherlands, everybody always comments on the flat land, but actually having
Yeah.
that flat land means that the sky is not broken up in our
Yep.
island, and so
Yeah.
there's an incredible weight to it. The sky is very significant. What kind of a weird statement is that? But you know what I mean. It's not disrupted by other things to distract us.
I think it's Montana is technically big sky country, and it's because it's so darn flat, and it's so clear there because there's so little light pollution that, I mean, there's places I've driven through years ago. Heather and I were driving through Utah from the highway down to Moab, down this old state highway, and I was just driving. It was the middle of the night, and I looked out the window and I just kind of glanced up, and it was like those pictures you see of the Milky Way, going all the way across the sky. And it was just because it was a particularly clear night, and we were out in the desert, and it was just one of those perfect nights. And I just pulled off the side of the highway, and we just got out and just stood underneath the thing. And I've been out there a lot in my life, and I've never seen it like it was that one night. And it was because, as you're saying, because it's so flat out there, it's like and in some ways the ground is so bland because it's all the same color in a lot of ways, especially in the desert, that the sky takes on even more significance in contrast. But yeah, this also feels like it's right. I mean, is that supposed to be the sun sort of central low? Is that supposed to be the sun going through clouds on the horizon?
Yeah, and I also get the feeling of we're right at the solstice now.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
the northern hemisphere. There's a sense that this is the bleak midwinter. And
Yeah.
it does definitely conjure again, right back to that first painting where we're looking at this idea of struggle,
Hmm.
that there being struggle here, as much as has its own qualities of serenity somehow, with that loaded white. White is masterfully applied here. I mean, it would be very interesting to see this painting actually in reality rather than backlit on my screen, because I would want to know where the lightest points are and what those lightest points actually look like in terms of pitch.
Yeah. And
Um,
yeah. And I mean, the color scheme on this is very small. you know, it's very it's not a wide range of colors, but they use them very well. It's also interesting in 200 years how different representation of people gets, and how much more impressionistic, especially in the late 19th century, things got.
yeah, and that was actually my first clue that this wasn't maybe, you and I said about this timeless quality in a lot of the Dutch painting, the Ice Age paintings,
Yeah.
is that actually they were produced, or we see a lot of ice and wintry scenes coming out of Holland, you know, for again centuries. But this is so much rooted or anchored in a kind of art history context that is much later than the other Dutch paintings we've looked
Absolutely.
at. And that impressionistic element, well,
Doesn't this almost feel like the end of an era in some ways? Common people going ice skating and some Dutch painter painting it. Feels like no one would do that in the 20th century,
I
or at
don't.
least not in any representational way like this.
Well, spending longer with the painting today, thinking about speaking with you, we said don't research. So again, this idea of just meeting the painting on my own terms and looking at it. I mean, the bleakness of it is very beautiful, but equally, that bleakness speaks to me of almost it's kind of post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic.
Yeah, I think the sky does a lot of that. Yeah.
Whereas the other ones, um, there's something joyous that is uncorrupted for me in both of these, actually.
You see a lack of corruption in the Winter Hunt painting?
I see joy.
Oh, interesting. I see chaos and death.
Mm. I'm again just going to go out on a limb here and say that
Yeah.
the word hunt, of course, is loaded,
Yeah.
but that as a human enterprise, hunting uh, isn't always viewed in a negative context.
No, I understand. Even if I didn't know the title, I still would feel that way.
Would you? That's
Yeah.
interesting because I did think it would be the title that made you feel that.
No, it's this central thing with the eye and the like ears about to eat something else in the right in the middle that kind of gets to me. It's almost like what was the Ouroboros? What is the thing that eats itself? It eats its own tail.
No idea, Bill. What are you talking about?
Really?
I don't know.
Why are you? There's this the famous mythological like snake that's eating its own tail. This has a little sense of that for me. I think it's just like a swirling nature of it. It's also interesting, something that was made in 1958. I wonder when this photograph was made, because there's so many paintings from the mid 20th century where both the canvas and the paint tones have shifted over time as they've oxidized and that kind of thing. Where I wonder how it looked when it was first painted versus how it looks now.
I think looking at a lot of Frankenthaler's other work, well, I mean, again, I think technically this is such a clever painting, you know, in terms of how we're tricked, our eye is tricked into being pleasured. The balance of color is skillful.
Sure.
Um,
Sorry, somebody's banging outside. Somebody's very, very upset. What's going on out there? I like the idea that they think if they just honk long enough, people are going to move. Go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe they're saying to us, shut up.
Yeah, they were just like, you know nothing about Frankenthaler.
Shut up. No. No, thinking about skillfulness of how the aesthetics of it, very measured. Something that looks perhaps chaotic at first glance is actually, I don't want to say controlled, and
Sure.
it's nor is it contrived, but it is deliberate.
Sure.
And has the same, it's part of the same vernacular really as that woodblock print. Or not.
I don't know. I mean, I understand. I understand the words coming out of your mouth. I'd have to think about it more.
But coming back to this, so from this painting, this one, I was thinking so much about Doig, because looking at Doig's work often to me is very dark, even when I know this is a case of information trumping what I think. You know, this painting, Ski Jacket, is a happy painting. It's a painting about experiencing being on the snow, learning how to ski, the mountains changing with the changing light throughout the day because of the reflection on the snow. It's a very kind of almost like a happy holiday painting.
Do you ski?
Yeah, and yet there's such a weighty darkness in this painting.
Yeah, I lean towards the weighty darkness in the painting.
And again, maybe this is simplifying in the way that I have possibly simplified and oversimplified what I see between the Hiroshige and the Frankenthaler. But actually, for me, there are so many similarities, not just visually, but in terms of a sense of something. Of course, it's guided by the visual, but nonetheless, it's about meeting winter in a way that isn't joyous.
Do you think that the fact that the people in this one are so small as to be sort of representational as one, it's like there's people here, it's not like individuals that you're actually getting some sense of them because you're so far away, that changes the representation of people even being in this photograph, that they really are like trees in a forest?
Are they the same people? Are they just the same?
I don't know. I feel the Doig is far more impersonal than these earlier paintings.
Why do you think that is?
I think that he chose to sort of zoom out so far that the people are not, they're not meant to be humans. They're meant to be props.
Are these people props?
Yeah, but I can get some sense of them. And even in the 19th century one, the imitation one. I mean, you see that one guy in the foreground and you can kind of get a sense of who he is. You see that one guy, you can almost feel the way he's putting the weight on his right foot there, you know. But go to the Doig and it's just sort of, it's like little ticks of paint in order to describe people skiing on a larger slope.
But I wonder if that kind of anonymous mass allows
By the way, is that two panels put
does look like,
together?
doesn't it, that it's been
Yeah.
painted in two halves. But
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, just thinking that when we have the flat scape of those teeny tiny figures, do we project ourselves? Do I project myself as much, if not more, into this? Because I don't see it. I don't see something that I can identify other than the fact I know they are meant to be human. It's very difficult for me in this painting, in you put yourself in this painting.
I identify with the people in this painting. I don't put myself in it.
Okay.
Where I'm seeing them as characters in a play. Where I understand what you're saying about the Doig. I've never been a big fan of skiing, so maybe I have. Maybe that's my problem. Is that I just feel like I'm cold and wet all the time. So when I see one of the people skiing, I just think about being cold and wet all the time.
When you see this though, are you thinking about being cold?
Oh yeah, I see cold in all of these paintings.
Yeah, I mean that's chilly.
That one feels very cold.
Yeah,
I imagine wearing wool socks and boots made of leather, and the snow is seeping into them and melting because of the warmth of my foot, and it just turns back to ice. It's just like that uncomfortable numbness of cold feet.
and yet earlier when we were talking about them in terms of their technical elements, we both said that this is actually quite a warm painting.
I think that its color is warm. I don't think that those people look warm to me.
No, they do look so cold. Isn't that interesting? We've got warm paintings in which we feel very cold.
Well, I think that the idea that we automatically assume that something that is warmer in tone, we automatically equate that with warmth, but you have a subject matter that is by definition cold. You know what I mean? So I think that those two things are in contrast and battling each other a little bit.
And also,
I think that's why, yeah, the Japanese woodblock feels much more correct for winter because it's got all these blues and sort of greens and grays, which actually feel more wintry than the European paintings. Like the Europeans, it's almost like they're trying to trick themselves into thinking that it isn't cold and miserable, and the Japanese just say, no, it is cold and miserable.
But isn't it also interesting that we're putting a spin on cold, having its own loaded language of whether it's a positive or a negative thing? You asked me right at the beginning. In fact, I don't even know if we were recording yet. Do I like winter really? Do I feel okay when the nights are drawing in? Yeah. And I don't see winter as a bad thing. I don't see darkness as a bad thing. Whereas I do understand and realize through listening that many people do.
Yeah.
That the cold is somehow wicked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of sucking life force in a lot of ways to me. It's like it's taking heat away from me. And I'm not a person who like needs to be warm all the time or loves the summertime. It's not anything like that. But there is a certain sense of survival.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these paintings, the people in them require civilization to survive. If they didn't have shelter and fire, even in the Rugel, there's a fire going on the left, isn't there?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So at least there's this sense, this image of, oh, we know how to get warm once we need to.
But then are we saying that we're judging these paintings based on how well we feel we would survive them?
I think about what it must have been like to be in 1565 and be in the cold and in the snow and how much it would have sucked to live back then. And I much prefer to live now. Yes. but I'm not. But it's funny in so many ways. I think of myself as a romantic, and then in so many other ways, I am sort of an anti-romantic.
Mm. So,
Yeah,
Bill, would you,
winter,
would you survive winter, do you think? Across all of these
sure.
seasons? Would you want to
Which,
be
if you
in
had to dive into one of these, which one would you choose?
the Doig?
Interesting. Yeah, that would be the last for me.
Yeah. What about you?
Uh, Probably the first one.
Mm. He's not for changing. This is the one he picked. You picked this right from the outset when we even started talking about this.
Yeah.
Um,
It's weird. It's because when I was in Prospect Park the other day and I was walking around and I was watching all of the people frolicking with their dogs and their kids and going sledding and walking around and snowshoeing and cross country skiing through the park in the city. There was this sense, especially now with this sheltering in place and all the rest of it, that it's like, oh, this is like one, because of this snow, we all have this common respite from being inside,
mm,
where we can be outside, we can be together, but we're still outside and far enough away with each other that it's not unsafe because we're all wearing masks mostly. And it very much brought me back to this idea of, oh, here's everyone in town having this common experience, and that common experience is due to snow and cold and the weather, like sort of dumping this experience on us, and it's there's a time limit on it. It's just like, the snow is almost gone actually out there, but for one glorious day it was something.
yeah. I mean that snowy
Winter.
cleanness, winter, the crispness.
Yeah.
I did think,
It
and
to me it's the sound.
the sound, but also, there's something so playful when one isn't worrying about survival in the cold. There's enormous scope for appreciating things like, I remember as a child thinking that my breath in front of my face was a playful sprite that had come out of me and became sort of suspended. And, I remember very, very
Interesting.
cold days trudging back and forth to school, and the little pond near the house being frozen and people skating on it. You know, those are real things. They're not fabrications or fantasies, but they have
Sure.
become elevated in memory as something really golden and special. And so winter to me
Yeah,
is a time of real
I
abundance, funnily enough.
yeah, to me, cold the winter is silence and solitude.
Hmm.
It's that dead sound after it's snow, where it like just sucks up all the sound, and you go outside and it just sort of, it's like you're in an anechoic chamber, like you're in a really dead studio room. It's like that, plus cold, plus me being alone in the quiet, hearing just sort of the nothingness of the outside, going for a walk. That's what I think about winter. It's interesting how different your and my views of winter are, our internalizations of it.
Well,
But you have lights and tinsel, and I have a Santa cap. So what
that
do
you
I?
had to be bossed into putting on your head.
I had to be bossed into finding one. I didn't mind putting it on.
Well, Bill, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, that was
And
fun.
I think it remains just to say thank you and also Merry Christmas.